Position. Okay, shalom and welcome to United Israel's Yom Teruah teaching. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking your time and joining with us today on this day that is holy to Yehovah. One of the things that I would start with is to ask the question, what else would you be doing on this day? I mean, this is the day. This is the day that we're going to talk about a very important part of the biblical calendar. After all, we're commanded to come together to observe on this day what is called in the Hebrew Bible a Shabbaton. A Shabbaton, that is translated as a solemn day of rest. And that it occurs on the first day of the seventh month on the biblical calendar. Now, according to the Jewish calendar, at sundown this evening, we cross into the seventh biblical month, and so that is why we are gathered here today. Now, biblically, this particular day, the first day of the seventh month, is known by two terms, and two terms only. The two terms that the first day of the seventh month are known as Zikron Teruah and Yom Teruah, and we're going to talk about that in this particular class. Zikron is typically translated with the English word memorial, and Yom, of course, is translated by the English word day. So all that we know by the name of the day is that it is somehow associated with a remembrance, and it is a particular day. So we're going to define the other word in our title for this day, Teruah. That makes up the bulk of the class today. The Bible provides very little information in regards to what we are to do and what we are not to do on this particular day. In fact, there are only two principal texts in the Hebrew Scriptures that deal specifically with the first day of the seventh month. And I want to go through those with you today. So if you will go with me to the book of Leviticus chapter 23, and I'm going to read two passages for you from Leviticus chapter 23. Now, I always like to point out, whenever we're talking about the festivals, these are called in the Hebrew Bible the festivals of the Lord, or the festivals of Yehovah. They are broad-based in their application. I believe that even though these festivals are given to the children of Israel, ultimately, in some way, shape, or fashion, they apply to all of humanity, and ultimately that will be the case. You'll recall that in Zechariah chapter 14, for instance, when we're talking about all the nations of the world will send delegates to Jerusalem to worship Jehovah of hosts, or they don't get rain. So even though these festivals are given in Leviticus chapter 23 to the people of Israel, there is an application in which they apply to all people. So if you'll go to Leviticus chapter 23, verse 23, it says, "And Jehovah spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, In the seventh month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of horns, a holy gathering. You shall do no servile work, but you shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yehovah." We're not going to do the offering today, and hopefully you're okay with that. But what we are going to do is talk about that which is applicable today, that which the text describes for us. And by the way, in the listing of the festivals in Leviticus chapter 23, I just read to you everything that we have on this particular day. Now, I read you an English translation, by the way. Notice that it says, according to this English translation, that this is, on this day, it is to be a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of horns, a holy gathering, and you'll do no work. That's it. There's not a lot of fluff here. And we're going to talk a little bit about other things that have come into the observance of this day. But as far as Leviticus 23, that's it. Now go with me to the book of Numbers, to Numbers chapter 29. And if you'll go with me there, I'm just going to read the first verse. It's actually verses 1 through 6 deal with this festival, but the rest of it deals with the sacrifices. So in Numbers chapter 29, verse 1, and in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a holy gathering. You shall do no servile work. It is a day of blowing the horn to you. A day of blowing the horn. And that's it. This that I've just covered with you today is absolutely all that the Bible has to say about the festival that goes by all the names that we've become accustomed to. People talk about this day, the Feast of Trumpets. Some call it the Festival of Trumpets. And you would think, based on everything that people say about this day, that the Bible would tell us a lot about what to do and not do on the first day of the 7th month, but that's it. Now, biblically, there is a difference when you compare what the Bible describes versus what traditionally the day has come to represent or mean. There's a pretty big difference between the two. So traditional Judaism has associated the first day of the 7th month with what is now popularly known as Rosh Hashanah. In Hebrew, Rosh Hashanah means literally the head of the year. And it is often said that the first day of the 7th month is the first new year on the civil calendar. According to Jewish tradition, there are 4 New Years, in fact, this being one, and the one that Judaism is most known for. So Rosh Hashanah is considered to be the new year, according to the civil calendar, the first day of the 7th month. Now, biblically speaking, when we talk about what the Bible talks about, biblically, the first day of the year, or as Exodus chapter 12 puts it, this will be the beginning of months to you. That's talking about the spring. It's not talking about the fall. It's the first month, Aviv, in the springtime. You'll recall Exodus 12 talks about Passover. And so Pesach, also known as Passover, Exodus chapter 12 talks about that particular day as the beginning of the months. But the rich traditions of Judaism developed over a long period of time, and they have preserved certain elements associated with this day. So what you'll find when you look at some of the traditions that have developed over time within Judaism related to the first day of the 7th month, there are certain themes that have come to be associated with this day that do have ties to the biblical record, and we're going to get into those. My teaching today is going to be somewhat brief, but I'm going to focus on some of the themes that are related to what has come to be called the Feast of Trumpets or the Festival of Trumpets. Now, here's something that I want to note as I begin the teaching today. I should make it very clear that if you look at the Hebrew text in the passages that I started with today, Leviticus chapter 23, Numbers chapter 29, the word or a word associated with trumpet of any kind is not to be found in these texts. So think about that. Let that soak in for just a minute. The festival known as the Feast of Trumpets, the Festival of Trumpets, according to the biblical record, in those 2 passages, there's no mention whatsoever of trumpet. Neither a ram's horn trumpet nor a silver trumpet. Neither one of those are mentioned in those. What we do have is our word of the day, which is Teruah. Teruah. We find in these texts the two titles again, Zichron Teruah and Yom Teruah. But we don't find the word trumpet. Now, often the word Teruah is associated with trumpet. We'll go through those texts in a moment. But what we do have is that this particular festival is associated with some other terms. One is Mikra Kodesh, which is generally translated into English as a holy convocation. That's if you like that authorized English version, such as the King James or some of these more, some of the older translations, a holy convocation. It's also called a Shabbaton, all right? A Shabbaton, you can do a word search on this, is generally translated as a day of solemn rest. And then again, the word Zikron is associated with it, and it comes from the root idea Zachar, which means to remember. So we have an association with a remembrance that's tied with this particular day. Now, besides these brief points that I've just covered, we have little more to go on that deals specifically with this day. I mean, that's it. So I could close the book and say, there you have it. Don't do any servile work. And whatever it means to make Teruah, you know, if it doesn't mean to blow a trumpet, what do we do? I mean, that's it, all right? Apples and honey, I mean, what do we do? What did we associate with this day? So what I want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit about two other passages which directly are tied to the first day of the seventh month. You can have these in your notes. I'm not going to read to you from Ezra chapter 3, but in Ezra chapter 3 and verse 6, we have an account of the beginning to offer sacrifices on the first day of the seventh month. Ezra and Nehemiah deal with the returnees from the Babylonian captivity. There is a point being made in Ezra chapter 3 that even though the temple was not rebuilt at this time, that they had begun to offer sacrifices, okay? And it says that they did this on the first day of the seventh month. Now, another passage that is related to or associated with the first day of the seventh month comes from Nehemiah, from Nehemiah. If you'll open up to Nehemiah chapter 8. In Nehemiah chapter 8, we have this particular story, all right? Let me open to the right book. I was about to read from the wrong book. Nehemiah chapter 8. And I want to make the point in verse 1 to set the stage. And when the seventh month came, and the children of Israel were in their cities, then all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the open place that was before the water gate, and they spoke to Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the Torah of Moses, which Jehovah had commanded to Israel. And Ezra the priest brought the Torah before the congregation, both of men and women, and all those who could hear with understanding upon the first day of the seventh month. Okay, so here we are. First day of the seventh month, these are the returnees. They've asked Ezra to bring the Torah out, and he does. And it says, if you follow this particular passage on, that he stands up above the people on a wooden platform and preaches from morning until midday. Now, I spared you that long sermon. Usually people can tolerate me for about an hour. So if we were going to be very biblical about this, I would talk to you for 3 or 4 hours, which I'm not going to do today. But this, now if you'll go with me to verse 6, I want to kind of give you a little bit more about this particular sermon that took place so many years ago in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So I'm going to read verse 6 if you'll follow along with me. And Ezra blessed Jehovah, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen and Amen, lifting up their hands, and they bowed their heads and worshiped Jehovah with their faces to the ground. Now, go to verse 8. So they read in the book in the Torah of God distinctly and gave the sense and caused them to understand the reading. And Nehemiah, who is the Tershatah, which is generally translated governor, and Ezra the priest, the scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, this day, what day are we on? First day of the 7th month, is holy to Jehovah your God. Do not mourn or weep. For all the people wept when they heard the words of the Torah. And he said to them, go your way, eat sumptuously, and drink sweet beverages, and send portions to those for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy to Jehovah, for the joy of Jehovah is your strength. So the Levites stilled the people, saying, hold your peace, for the day is holy. Don't be grieved. And the people went their way to eat and to drink and to send portions and to make great mirth, because they had understood the words that were declared to them. So what we get here are some other things that are associated biblically with the first day of the 7th month, right? All right. It says that Ezra gives this clear to them. He makes it clear. He wants the people to do certain things, and he wants them to understand that this day is set apart and that they should use it to do certain things, one of which is to give to those who don't have. All right, so these are some things that are associated with the first day of the 7th month. Now, I did want to point out, you just heard this. Did you notice that there is no mention made whatsoever in this particular text with any of the things that we commonly associate with the present day customs that are attached to the first day of the 7th month? Right? It's just, I find it interesting. See, we have a long and varied tradition that has come to be associated with the day, but when we talk about the biblical record, it's pretty simple and straightforward. There's not a lot else. But we're going to show you some connections here in a few moments. I find it interesting. And one of the things that stands out as I think about the day, as one who loves Scripture and seeks to live my life according to the Scriptures, one of the things that comes into my mind, I have several questions. What is the significance of the day? In other words, when I think about Passover, in Hebrew it's called Pesach. When I think about Passover, on that day, we associate it with the redemption from Egypt. The text makes it clear that's what this day is about. We talk about Sukkot, we think about the biblical text that says for 7 days you're going to dwell in booths, right, to remind you of the time when the children of Israel were camping out under the stars. See, those are the things that come to my mind. Shabbat. When I think about Shabbat, it occurs every week on the 7th day, and we associate two things primarily with Shabbat. The creation of the world, right? And we also think about the redemption from Egypt. Depends on if you read Exodus chapter 20 or Deuteronomy chapter 5. Both of these ideas are associated with Shabbat. But when it comes to the 7th day, or the first day of the 7th month, Yom Teruah, Zikron Teruah, what is it that we're talking about? What does this mean? There's really no biblical passage that we can directly derive a meaning from as we have these other things that I mentioned. So it becomes my mission today to take a look at what we do know. And then we're going to blow some horns. We're going to make some noise, and you're going to be able to connect it then. But I want to go into some details here from the biblical text, because what I really want to do is to define the meaning of the word Teruah. It's used 33 times in Scripture, Teruah. What does it mean? Is it trumpets? You know? I mean, how is a day of trumpets associated with, or how are trumpets associated with the day that the word trumpet is never used unless Teruah somehow ties to a trumpet? Now, I want to read to you a definition of Teruah from the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. All right, so here's what it says. There are two coexisting meanings. On the one hand, it means alarm or scream. Nobody scream yet, just stick with me. Alarm or scream. And on the other hand, shout or jubilation. They are both also found in the verb ruah, which is the root of teruah, to shout or to rejoice. Of these meanings, alarm can probably be taken to be the more original or the older form. All right? According to the individual situation, it can be taken to mean cry in the sense of a war cry, battle cry, and a loud shout of joy. But the latter meaning is missing for more suggestions. And then he goes into, in this particular lexicon, all the variations that are used in Scripture and every passage and how it's used so that you get a full meaning. So what we find as I work through every, and I won't do this today, I'm just going to hit a few passages, but when you work through every variation of meaning, every passage that uses the word teruah, you're going to find it tied to this idea of an alarm for war. You'll find it used in that sense to announce the day of Yehovah. It's used to signal, as a signal. Teruah is associated with a signal, like to mean like when you break the camp, when the tribes break up and go in their marches. And then it's also used in association with joy and fear. So teruah, a teruah, whatever it is, I just read you the basic definition, can be produced in a variety of ways. By voice. So I can use my voice to create a teruah, a shout, a cry, a scream. I can do it with a shofar or with a trumpet. And there are two types of trumpets we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the shofar, which comes in various types. We're going to have some practice on all these. So these are shofar, which are ram's horn trumpets. And then I also have, for your listening pleasure later, this. I have two of these. So we have enough here so that everyone can blow these. And if you have yours at home, you can join in with us. Pets, neighbors, everyone loves this. Love this festival. Okay, but these are the types of trumpets that we're going to talk about. Now, go with me to Psalm 89. Psalm 89. I want to kick things off as I work through to define this today for you. Go to Psalm 89, verse 16. If you're in an English Bible, it's going to be verse 15. Psalm 89, 15. And here's what it says. Happy is the people that know the joyful note. They shall walk, O Yehovah, in the light of your face, or in the light of your countenance. So it says, happy is the people that know. In Hebrew it says, Teruah. Teruah. Happy is the people that know Teruah. So my goal today is to get everyone into that place where you know Teruah. You know what that word means, you understand it fully, and therefore you can keep Zikron Teruah, Yom Teruah, the memorial day of Teruah, and the day of Teruah. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple of examples of a voice being associated with the word Teruah. So we're going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 4. And I'm going to go through quite a few, but I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. And those who want to go back and listen again to take better notes are welcome to do that. 1 Samuel chapter 4 and verse 5. And when the ark of the covenant of Yehovah came into the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth trembled. And when the Philistine heard the noise of the shout, they said, what is the noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews? and they understood that the ark of Jehovah was come into the camp. Now there, where it says great shout, that word there is Teruah, a great shout. No horn involved, but as the Philistines heard this noise, this great shout, it's called in Hebrew a Teruah, but it's by voice. Now go with me to the Psalms. Go to Psalm 27. Psalm 27 and verse 6. It says, "And now shall my head be lifted up above my enemies round about me. Therefore I will offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. I will sing, I will make melody to Jehovah." And this particular passage has to do with making a lovely noise to Jehovah. Notice where it says sacrifices of joy. In the Hebrew, it says sacrifices of Teruah. It's a joyful shout, you see. Now, where did the translator get that? It's the beauty of learning to read it in the Hebrew. You can use any biblical tool will help you do this. Blue Letter Bible is one online that's free. Go look at the word that's translated joy. But I wanted to highlight that because a sacrifice, this is not talking about the slaughter of a living being or a living creature. This is talking about a different kind of sacrifice, a sacrifice that is associated with Teruah. All right, now look at Psalm 33. We're right here, so go ahead. I have that in my notes, chapter 33. Verse 3, "Sing to him a new song, play skillfully with loud jubilations." In Hebrew, it's here a new song where it talks about loud jubilations. Teruah. Teruah. Now again, you can see some words in the biblical Hebrew are difficult to translate. Have you ever looked up a word, you're doing a word study, and the concordance or whatever will say it means this, it gives you all those, it means this, those are supplied by a translator. I want to get to the meaning, what is the root meaning of Teruah, because this is a memorial, a day associated with Teruah, something that can be sacrificed, something that can be associated with a joyful noise unto God. Now, if you go to the book of Job, go to the book of Job, chapter 8. In Job 8, verse 21, "He will yet fill your mouth with laughing and your lips with rejoicing." Again, rejoicing here in Hebrew is Teruah. All right? So you can see how the translators are coming up with all these variations to give us this one single word. And while we're in Job, go to chapter 33. Job 33. And I want to read verse 26. "He shall pray to God, he will be favorable to him, and he shall see his face with joy." Teruah. Teruah. So you can see it, all right? Now, go with me to Ezra chapter 3. We talked about this a moment ago, and I might go ahead and read this passage. If you'll go to verse 11, Ezra 3:11, "And they sang responsively in praising and giving thanks to Jehovah, because he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. And all the people shouted with a great shout." Both times there, the word shout is Teruah. "When they praised Jehovah, because the foundation of the house of Jehovah was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and the chiefs of the fathers' houses, both old men who had seen the first house when the foundation of his house was laid before their eyes, wept with a loud voice. But many shouted," there's our word again, "aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the shout of joy from the sound of weeping of the people, for the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard afar off. So you get this idea that Teruah is a loud shout. It can be made with the voice. In none of these passages are we associating the word Teruah with a trumpet, but it is a noise that is produced. Now, go with me to the book of Numbers, and I want to read a passage to you that I will associate with this day as well. Now, let me ask you to think about something. Go to Numbers 10. But what trumpet is generally associated with the first day of the seventh month? The shofar, right? It's generally associated with this trumpet and not the silver trumpet. But remember, Leviticus 23 and Numbers 29 are only using the word Teruah. So I'm going to read you something here in Numbers 10. In Numbers chapter 10, beginning in verse 1, and Jehovah spoke to Moses, saying, make thee 2 trumpets of silver. Look at this. I just happen to have 2 trumpets of silver. I didn't make them, but put them right here. All right. Of a whole piece you shall make them, and you shall use them, get this, for calling of the assembly, for the journeying of the camps, and when they shall blow with them, all the assembly shall assemble themselves to you at the door of the tent of meeting. And if they blow but one trumpet, when the princes, the heads of the thousands of Israel shall gather themselves to you, when you blow an alarm, then the camps that lie on the east part shall go forward. When you blow an alarm the second time, then the camps that lie on the south side shall take their journey. They shall blow an alarm for their journeys, but when the congregation is to be gathered together, you shall blow, but you shall not sound an alarm. And the sons of Aaron the priest shall blow with the trumpets, and they shall be to you for an ordinance forever throughout your generations. And if you go to war in your land against the enemy that oppresses you, you shall blow an alarm with the trumpets, and you shall be remembered before Jehovah your God. You shall be saved from your enemies. Also, in the day of your gladness, and in your solemn days, and in the beginning of your months, you shall blow with the trumpets over your burnt offerings, over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, that they may be to you for a memorial before Jehovah. I am Jehovah your God. Now, these particular silver trumpets, in Numbers chapter 10, we have 9 or 10 reasons that are associated with the blowing of these trumpets, the silver trumpets. Now, I want to point out that in this particular text that I just read to you in verses 5 and 6, where it uses the word alarm, that word in Hebrew is Teruah. Remember when we first started, Teruah generally means an alarm, a cry, a shout. See, it's this, but it's not the voice of your mouth here. Here, it is the voice or the sound of the silver trumpets. All right, go with me to Numbers chapter 31. In Numbers 31, I want to read verse 6, I believe. Numbers 31, verse 6. And Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 of every tribe, then and them and Pinchas, the son of Eleazar the priest, to the war with the holy instruments and the trumpets to blow in his hand. In Hebrew, it's the trumpets of Teruah in his hands. So these are now referred to as the trumpets of Teruah. The reason I bring this passage up is because most people associate Zikron Teruah and Yom Teruah with the shofar and not these. All right. I'll just give you this one in your notes, but the same phrase is used in 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 12, the trumpets of Teruah. And in that particular passage, we're talking about the silver trumpets, in Hebrew, katzotrot. Katzotrot. Okay, now we're moving to the shofar. And the shofar is commonly associated with the first day of the seventh month. In Judaism, whenever you see, quite often, whether it's a Facebook meme or a card or anything associated with Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, you generally find this trumpet. Now, a lot of the Yemenite community uses the shofar hagadol, the big shofar. But generally, this is the one, the small one. It's not quite as beautiful as mine, but you've seen them. Right, I'll talk about that. But whenever we see the shofar, we call to mind various stories. How many of you know the story of the walls of Jericho falling down? Let's look at that. Joshua chapter 6. Joshua chapter 6. Joshua 6. We'll just hit a couple of passages to bring this to your remembrance. And let's start in verse 2. Joshua chapter 6, verse 2. And Jehovah said to Joshua, See, I have given into your hand Jericho and its king and the mighty men of valor. You shall go round the city, all the men of war, going about the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 shofarot of ram's horns. Shofarot is the plural feminine form. So you're going to have 7 shofars, as we say in English in the South, shofars. And on the 7th day you shall compass the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow with the shofarot. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the shofar, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat. And people shall go up every man straight before him. And Yehoshua the son of Nun called the priest and said to him, Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 shofarot of ram's horns before the ark of Jehovah. And he said to the people, Pass on and compass the city, and let those stripped for war pass on before the ark of Jehovah. And it came to pass, when Yehoshua had spoken to the people, that the 7 priests bearing the 7 shofarot of ram's horns passed on before Jehovah and blew the shofarot, and the ark of the covenant of Jehovah followed them, and those stripped for war went before the priest that blew the horns. The rearward came after the priest going on and blowing with the shofarot. And Yehoshua commanded the people, saying, You shall not shout, nor make any noise with your voice, neither shall any word proceed out of your mouth until the day that I bid you shout. Then you shall shout. So the ark of Jehovah compassed the city, going about it once, and they came to the camp and spent the night. Now just to hit a couple more, if you look at verse 13, the 7 priests bearing the 7 shofarot of ram's horns went before the ark of Jehovah, went on continually and blew with the shofarot. Now it's interesting to note that what you have as the ark proceeds, you have these 7 priests that are blowing their shofar. Look down at verse 16, and it came to pass the 7th time when the priest blew the shofarot that Yehoshua said to the people, Shout, for Jehovah has given you the city, and so forth. So this particular story, if you look down in verse 20, that when the people shouted with the great shout, following the voice of the shofar, the walls of the city fell down. All right, and you remember this story. Everybody knows this story. All the kids love the story of the walls of Jericho coming down. Now, a couple of other passages, because there is an association in these texts that I'm covering with the shofar, just like the silver trumpets and the shofar are both associated with the idea of Teruah, as well as the voice. Now, look, if you will, to 2 Samuel chapter 6 and verse 15. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of Jehovah with shouting and with the sound of the shofar. So here we associate both Teruah and the sound of the shofar. They're mentioned together but separately. So what we're going to do is we're going to get an idea that it's not necessarily, Teruah doesn't have to be associated with a shofar, but it can be. So in your notes, I'm not going to read this one, but in 1 Chronicles 15:28, it's also mentioned. The Teruah and the voice of the shofar. It's also in Amos chapter 2, verse 2. There it's talking about the destruction of the enemies, and it ties the sound of the shofar and the word Teruah. Now, I did want to cover one of the prophetic passages that I think is very important in this regard. If you'll look at Zephaniah, in Zephaniah chapter 1, beginning in verse 14. This brings us to an eschatological tie-in for this particular day and the noise. In Zephaniah 1:14, the great day of Jehovah is near, it is near and hastens greatly, the sound of the day of Jehovah. So what is that sound? Ready? The mighty men shall cry there bitterly. That day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of ruin and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of shofar and alarm against the fortified cities and against the high towers. So there we have the day of Jehovah is associated with this sound that is tied then to Teruah and the sound of a shofar. Now, if you'll go with me back to the Psalms, I know I'm doing this in the order that I need to do it, so if you feel like you're going back and forth, that's not by accident. It's mainly just to train your fingers so that you can go back and forth. So in Psalm 47, the entire psalm is wonderful. But I want you to look at verse 6. Psalm 47, verse 6. God here is Elohim. Elohim has ascended with a shout. Yehovah with the sound of a shofar. In this particular psalm, it associates the ascension of God with both Teruah and the sound, or literally bakol, with a voice of a shofar. So when I blow this in a few minutes, you're going to hear the voice of a shofar, and you're going to also hear Teruah. All right? Now you will recall that in Exodus chapter 19, when the giving of the Torah is described, that as the people assembled at Mount Sinai, at Horeb, there is this awesome description of darkness and clouds and lightning and thunder. And it also says that there is a sound of a shofar which grew louder and louder and louder, ultimately causing great fear to come upon the people. Remember the events of this day. We read this story, but I think we just kind of read over it and we don't get the full impact of it. Imagine a thick, cloudy darkness with lightning and this incredibly loud shofar that gets so loud. And ultimately it causes the people to say, Moses, you go talk to God. We don't want to experience this anymore unless we die. So that's in Exodus chapter 19, verses 16 through 20. There's another passage in the Torah that is associated with the sound of the shofar. And that's found in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 8 through 10. It's describing there what is called the Yovel, the Jubilee. This particular thing happens in the seventh month, but on the 10th day of the month, at the 50th year, the people are to sound the shofar on this particular day throughout the land and announce basically liberty to all the inhabitants of the land. But that is associated with the sounding of the shofar. The coronation of kings, we have the story of Solomon and Jehu and other kings, and it talks about how they would sound the shofar to announce the coronation ceremony, if you will, and they would generally follow the sounding of the shofar with "Long live the King." All right. Now go with me to Psalm 81. Psalm 81. I just want to read the first few verses of this psalm. It says, "Sing aloud to God our strength. Make a joyful noise to the God of Jacob. Raise a song, sound the timbrel, the sweet lyre with the harp. Blow a shofar at the new moon, at the full moon on our feast day." So the sounding of a shofar became associated with the announcement of a new month, Rosh Chodesh. So here we have a sounding of the shofar on the first day of the month, and we're talking about the first day of the seventh month. So we know for a fact that on the seventh month, the first day, a shofar would indeed be sounded. But what else could be sounded in order to associate it with Teruah? You can sound off with your voice. You can sound off with a silver trumpet. You can sound off with a shofar. A couple other points as I wind down the teaching today on Yom Teruah, on Zichron Teruah, the redemption of the future, the great eschatological salvation that the Bible describes in the prophets is associated with the sounding of a great shofar. So go with me to the book of Isaiah, to Isaiah chapter 27. And I just want to read one verse. In Isaiah chapter 27, it says in verse 13, "And it will come to pass on that day that a great shofar shall be blown, and they shall come who were lost in the land of Assyria and the outcast in the land of Egypt, and shall worship Jehovah in the holy mountain at Jerusalem." This passage is set off by white spaces, and it indicates that in the last days that this great shofar will be sounded, and the remnant of the people. Now, this is to indicate that every dispersion that's happened in history, if there's still those exiles that are out and their descendants are still scattered, this is the time when they'll be regathered, and it will be heralded by the sound of a great shofar. Shofar Hagadol. All right? Now, it's also associated with the resurrection of the dead. Isaiah chapter 18. So I tell people, be careful when you blow these horns. Walls can fall down. The resurrection of the dead could take place, right? So if you go to Isaiah chapter 18, I just want to pick up verse 3 and tell you the verse that's used to associate the resurrection of the dead with the sounding of the trumpet. Here it is. Isaiah 18 verse 3 says, "All you inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth, see when he lifts up a banner on the mountains, and when he blows a shofar, hear." You go, well, how has that to do with the resurrection of the dead? In the English translation where it says dwellers on the earth, in Hebrew it's ba'aretz, which can also mean in the earth. So people began to associate that when you hear the shofar sound, all you dwellers on the earth and those who live in the earth, listen, hear. That's the passage that is associated with. Now, one of my favorite passages that has to do with this particular day, with this particular noise, with the sounding of a shofar, if you'll go with me to Zechariah, to the prophet Zechariah, and I want to go to chapter 9, Zechariah chapter 9. And I want to read verse 14. Zechariah 9:14, it says, "And Jehovah shall be seen over them, and his arrow shall go forth like lightning, and Adonai Jehovah shall blow the shofar and shall move in the storm winds of the south. Now this is actually the great shofar, I believe, that's mentioned in Isaiah 27:13. But I want you to pay close attention. This is not an angel blowing it. This is not a Messiah coming. This is Jehovah himself. And it says that he will sound the trumpet. Now, there could be some who say, well, I don't know how literal that is. Well, I'm just reading what the text says. How literal you make it, it's up to you. It's your, But what does it say? It says that Jehovah will sound this particular trumpet. So on Zikron Teruah, on Yom Teruah, at the time of this holy convocation, this Shabbaton, on a day referred to by no less than Ezra the priest as a day holy unto Jehovah, we, collectively, God's people, should cry aloud. Remember in Isaiah chapter 58, it says, cry aloud, lift up your voice, don't hold back. On this day, we should do that. We should lift up our voices. We should be calling an alarm. We should be calling for an assembly of God's people, to rally the people together, to cause them to move forward. We should be declaring Jehovah as our King, both our King and a King over all the earth, as Zechariah 14:9 says. We should also be blowing the shofar on the first day of the seventh month to announce the beginning of a new month. And we should be affirming the prophecies of a coming redemption that are spoken of in the prophets, the resurrection of those who presently sleep in the dust. All of these things have to do with the day known as a memorial of Teruah. Teruah can be voice, it can be a shofar, it can be a trumpet made of silver. The idea is to make noise for a very specific point. Now, as I conclude this teaching, I will attempt to make a joyful noise, as it's translated. Are you ready? Are you ready? Make sure that the kids will hear this in a minute, right? I'll attempt to make a joyful noise before my King, Jehovah. Now, I've already told Mark that I have to put this microphone, in case I get the note right, I'm going to put the microphone a little bit away from my mouth here. Okay, so the first one that I'm going to blow is, let's try this one. Okay, so this is a Yemenite shofar. It's made of a kudo. It's called a kudo. And so here we go. That's one. Now, I like the sound of that. It's got a deep sound to it. I don't think it matters who blows it. If you can get your lips just right, you can make that noise. Now, I'm going to blow this shofar. This shofar is a ram's horn. This was one of the ones that we made at our shofar factory. My grandson made this. And then I borrowed it. I told him I borrowed it until I'm too old to blow it or until he can take it from me, whichever comes first. So I like this one, and let's see if I can do it right. Doesn't that sound nice? I like it. All right, so this is my favorite. And then we also have the silver trumpets. And these trumpets aren't typically associated with the first month of the seventh day, but biblically they are, because they make Teruah And remember in Numbers chapter 10, verses 1 through 10, which is dealing with these silver trumpets, verses 5 and 6 use the word Teruah. So if you're talking about a memorial of Teruah, or if you're talking about a day of Teruah, this trumpet is perfectly acceptable. So here we go. All right. So these are the trumpets. Today is a day known as Zikron Teruah, Yom Teruah. It is a day to make noise with these trumpets. I want to close with one passage from the Psalm one more time, just so that I can make my final point in Psalm 89 and verse 15 in the English, verse 16 in Hebrew. And it says, "Happy is the people that know the joyful note." In Hebrew, that's Teruah, remember. "They shall walk, O Yehovah, in the light of your countenance." And this has been the purpose of this teaching today, is that you would now know the meaning of Teruah, which that is the translation of a joyful note here. And now knowing it, may you be happy. And for those of you who are my friends who follow traditional Judaism, I wish you from the bottom of my heart to have a sweet and prosperous and healthy new year on the Jewish calendar. And now we are going to let others blow the horn. But the rest of you, if you have a horn, I want you to blow your own horn and so forth. So does anybody here want to try it now? What we can do is we can, you want to try to blow it? Okay, we have a volunteer. Now, pick your horn. You get to pick whichever one you want. Which one do you like? You want to try them all? You want to try this one? All right, well, let's use this one. This one's the best one. Look, I'm going to wipe it off so you don't get cooties. All right, you ready? Now, look, you have to do your lips like close. You got to blow it more hard, like. All right, now look, do it without that. Go. Ah, there we go. Look, wait. You want to try it again? You did great. That's great. All right, let's try it again. That was perfect. Turn around so your mama can see. Good. There you go. Now look, you want to try the big one? This is it? Good job. All right. Anybody else? All right, we're going to let somebody else try if they want to try. Make sure that whatever you do, you make some noise today. Because that's basically, you think about everything that we covered. It's an alarm. It's got all sorts of purposes. But I want you to make sure that you get this down. You want to try it again? Okay. You got enough? You should get in your brother. All right. You ready? Does he want to try it? You want to try it? You want to try it? Come on. Now look, you may know this already. You got it. Look, do your lips like this. Go. Blow it hard. All right, now do it with the horn. Do it just like that. Close. You got to do it. Got to get the air through there. There you go. All right, try again. It takes practice. Keep going. You can do it. Look, you have to try this because it is harder than it looks. I just posted a video on my Facebook page of some IDF soldiers, and they're all trying to blow it and make some noise. And it's funny because, it just takes a little practice. So that's all you got to do is just practice. So I'll give you one more, and then I'll have Mark stop the stream, and then we'll let you practice on your own. So here we go. Yom Teruah. See there? Mine down step 2. Sounded kind of rough at the end there. Yom Teruah. Zikron Teruah. Have a wonderful day, beautiful week.
4 legs at the door.
That's all right. Shalom. Thanks for joining us.